Michael Davidson stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of the apartment he shared with his wife Emma for the past 3 years. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened his blue tie, knowing that today would be the day he would break everything they had built together. The guilt gnawed at his conscience, but the excitement of his secret relationship with Rebecca, his coworker, overshadowed any remorse he felt. The morning started like any other. Emma was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast and humming softly to herself. The smell of coffee and toast filled their small but cozy home. She had no idea that her world was about to shatter. Michael watched her from the doorway, remembering how they first met in college, their wonderful wedding day, and all the dreams they had shared. But now, at 32, he felt suffocated by the routines of married life. "Your coffee's ready?" Emma called out with a smile, her long brown hair tied in a messy bun. She was wearing the apron he had given her last Christmas, the one with little cats printed all over it. Michael's stomach twisted with guilt, but he had already made up his mind. Rebecca had been texting him all morning, asking if he had done it yet. They had been seeing each other secretly for 2 months now, stealing moments during lunch breaks and making excuses about late meetings. Rebecca was everything Emma wasn't: spontaneous, career-driven, and exciting. At least, that's what Michael told himself to justify his actions. "Emma, we need to talk," Michael said, his voice steadier than he expected. Emma looked up from her phone, where she had been checking her schedule for the day. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, a job she loved with all her heart. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing the serious look on his face. The morning sunlight streaming through their kitchen window caught the wedding ring on her finger, making it sparkle. Michael took a deep breath. "I can't do this anymore. Our marriage, it's not working for me." The words came out cold and rehearsed, just as he had practiced them in his head countless times. Emma's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, shock, hurt, and finally, a deep pain that made Michael look away. "What do you mean? We can fix this. We can go to counseling, take a vacation, anything." Her voice cracked as she reached for his hand. But Michael stepped back, creating a physical distance that matched the emotional gulf he had already created. "I've been thinking about this for a while. I need space. Our relationship has become stale." He couldn't bring himself to confess about Rebecca. That would have been too cruel, even for what he was doing now. Emma's coffee cup slipped from her trembling hands, chattering on the floor. The dark liquid spread across their kitchen tiles like a stain, much like how their marriage was unraveling in front of their eyes. "Are you seeing someone else?" she whispered, her intuition hitting closer to home than Michael was comfortable with. "No," he lied, avoiding her tear-filled eyes. "I just need to find myself again. I'll pack some things and stay at a hotel for now." The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, knowing very well that Rebecca's apartment would be his destination. Within an hour, Michael had packed 2 suitcases with his essential belongings. Emma sat on their bed, watching silently as he moved around the room, picking up pieces of his life. She didn't try to stop him anymore, and somehow, her quiet acceptance hurt more than if she had screamed or fought. "I'll contact you through email about the divorce proceedings," Michael said at the door, his voice professional and detached. Emma didn't respond. She just stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, looking small and lost in their apartment that suddenly seemed too big. As Michael walked to his car, you could feel the neighbors' curious eyes watching from behind their curtains. Mrs. Peterson from next door was watering her plants, deliberately avoiding eye contact. The neighborhood gossip mill would be working overtime today. He started his car and drove away without looking back, his wedding ring sitting heavy in his pocket. His phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "Did you do it? Are you okay?" Michael felt a mix of relief and excitement as he typed back a quick "yes, it's done." What he didn't see was Emma sliding down against the closed door, her body shaking with sobs, their wedding photo falling from the wall as if the house itself was mourning the end of their marriage. 6 months had passed since Michael walked out of his marriage, and his new life with Rebecca seemed perfect on the surface. They lived in her modern downtown apartment, with its sleek furniture and city views that made Michael feel like he had stepped into a different world. Gone were the mismatched coffee mugs and handmade quilts that Emma had loved so much. Every morning, Rebecca would wake up at exactly 6 a.m., go for a run, and return with 2 perfectly made lattes from the expensive coffee shop downstairs. Michael admired how put together she always looked, even first thing in the morning. It was different from Emma's messy morning hair and oversized t-shirts, though sometimes he caught himself missing those simple moments. At work, they maintained a professional distance, but their colleagues had figured out their relationship weeks ago. Some gave them disapproving looks, especially those who knew Emma from company parties. Michael's old friend Tom from accounting stopped having lunch with him, and Sarah from HR would take a different elevator if she saw him waiting. "Let them talk," Rebecca would say, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair. "They're just jealous of what we have." She was ambitious and determined, already eyeing the next promotion. Michael found himself working later hours to keep up with her energy, often missing dinner with his parents on Sunday nights. His mother had left several voicemails, each one more disappointed than the last. "Emma came by today," she said in one message. "That poor girl looks so thin, Michael. I raised you better than this." He deleted the message without calling back. Michael avoided his old neighborhood like the plague, taking longer routes to work and shopping at different stores. He had heard through mutual friends that Emma had moved out of their apartment, unable to afford the rent on her teacher's salary. The news made him uncomfortable, but Rebecca was quick to distract him with plans for their future. "We should look at houses in the new development by the lake," she suggested one evening, scrolling through real estate listings on her tablet. "Now that your divorce is almost final, we can start planning our life together properly." The divorce proceedings were moving slowly. Emma hadn't contested anything, which somehow made Michael feel worse. She had signed away their shared assets without argument, only keeping her personal belongings and their old car. His lawyer said she hadn't even asked for alimony. One night, while Rebecca was at a business dinner, Michael found himself looking at old photos on his phone. He had meant to delete them but never got around to it. There was Emma on their honeymoon, laughing as she built a sandcastle. Another showed her decorating their Christmas tree, wearing that ridiculous reindeer sweater she loved. The last photo was from just a week before he left, Emma in their garden, proudly showing off the tomatoes she had grown. His thumb hovered over the delete button, but he couldn't do it. Instead, he buried the photos in a folder named Old Documents. Rebecca brought excitement and sophistication to his life, but sometimes Michael felt like he was playing a part in someone else's story. She had strong opinions about everything: what he should wear, where they should eat, who they should socialize with. The spontaneity he had once found so attractive now felt more like carefully orchestrated chaos. "We're much better suited," Rebecca would remind him whenever she sensed his mood dipping. "Emma was holding you back. Look at how much you've accomplished in just 6 months with me." It was true that he had received a promotion, though it came with longer hours and more stress than he had bargained for. As Michael sat in their perfectly decorated living room, watching Rebecca plan their future with the same efficiency she applied to her spreadsheets at work, a small voice in his head wondered if he had confused comfort with boredom in his marriage to Emma. But he pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the expensive watch Rebecca had given him last week, a symbol, she said, of their sophisticated new life together. Later that night, he dreamed of Emma's homemade chocolate chip cookies and woke up with an inexplicable ache in his chest. But the morning came with its usual routine: Rebecca's perfect latte, their coordinated outfits, and another day of proving to the world, and himself, that he had made the right choice. Rebecca's birthday arrived on a crisp autumn evening, and Michael had spent weeks planning the perfect celebration. He had made reservations at the Golden Leaf, the newest upscale restaurant across town that everyone was talking about. It was far from his old neighborhood, which made him feel safe from any unexpected encounters from his past life. "You're going to love this place," Michael said as they pulled up in his new black BMW, another symbol of his transformed life. Rebecca stepped out, wearing a red designer dress that probably cost more than his old monthly mortgage payment. Her diamond earrings caught the light from the street lamps, sparkling like stars. The restaurant's exterior was modern and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a sophisticated gold leaf logo that matched its name. A valet took their car, and Michael felt a surge of pride as other patrons turned to look at them. They were the perfect power couple, exactly what he had always wanted to be. Inside, the hostess led them through the dimly lit dining room, past tables of well-dressed people engaged in quiet conversation. The air smelled of expensive perfume and grilled steaks. Soft jazz played in the background, and the clink of fine china and crystal glasses created an atmosphere of luxury. "This is perfect," Rebecca whispered, squeezing his hand as they were seated at a corner table with a view of the city lights. The tablecloth was crisp and white, the silverware polished to a mirror shine. A small candle flickered between them, casting warm shadows across their faces. Michael opened the leather-bound wine list, determined to impress Rebecca with his newly acquired knowledge of fine wines. She had been teaching him about vintages and regions, mocking his former preference for whatever was on sale at the local store. The 2015 Bordeaux might be nice, he suggested, trying to sound confident. Rebecca was busy checking her makeup in her compact mirror when the sommelier approached their table. Michael ordered the wine, feeling pleased with himself when the man nodded approvingly at his choice. Everything was going according to plan. "I have something for you," Michael said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He had bought Rebecca a delicate gold bracelet from Tiffany's, knowing she preferred their signature blue boxes to any other jewelry brand. As he held it out, he remembered how Emma had cried with joy over the simple silver necklace he had given her on their first anniversary. The thought of Emma created an unexpected knot in his stomach. He pushed it away, focusing instead on Rebecca's delighted expression as she examined the bracelet. "It's absolutely perfect," she said, immediately holding out her wrist for him to put it on. Their server hadn't arrived yet, but Michael was grateful for the delay. It gave him time to compose himself and shake off the unwelcome memories that kept trying to surface. He took a sip of water, his hand slightly unsteady as he set the glass back down. "The menu looks divine," Rebecca said, studying the options with the same intensity she brought to analyzing market reports. "Though I hope the service isn't as slow as the reviews mentioned. We have that charity gala preview to attend later." Michael had forgotten about the gala. Their social calendar was always full these days, a constant whirl of networking events and charity functions. Sometimes he missed quiet evenings at home, watching movies in comfortable silence, but he would never admit that to Rebecca. The restaurant had filled up around them, the buzz of conversation growing louder. Michael checked his watch, an expensive timepiece Rebecca had chosen to replace his old one, and wondered what was keeping their server. Rebecca was starting to look impatient, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on the table. "I'll catch someone's attention," Michael offered, looking around for staff. He could see several servers moving efficiently between tables, their black uniforms blending into the restaurant's elegant atmosphere. One was heading their way, notepad in hand. Michael straightened in his chair, ready to order the elaborate meal he had planned. The clicking of sensible shoes on the hardwood floor announced their server's approach. He was studying the menu one last time, wanting everything to be perfect for Rebecca's birthday dinner, when a familiar voice made his blood run cold. "Good evening. Welcome to the Golden Leaf. I'll be your server tonight." Michael's head snapped up from the menu, and his heart nearly stopped. There stood Emma, wearing a black server's uniform, her face pale but professional. But what made his hands go numb and his mouth dry wasn't just seeing his estranged wife. It was the unmistakable curve of her pregnant belly beneath her apron. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The restaurant's ambient noise faded to a distant hum as Michael's mind frantically calculated the timing. They had been separated for 6 months, which meant his throat tightened as he realized the baby had to be his. Emma's hand instinctively moved to protect her belly when their eyes met, a gesture so maternal and protective that it made Michael's chest ache. She looked different. Thinner in the face despite her pregnancy, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her wedding ring was gone, but she wore the simple silver necklace he had given her years ago. Rebecca, oblivious to the tension, was still studying her menu. "I'll have the," she started to say, then looked up when she noticed the thick silence. Her eyes darted between Michael's shocked face and their server, picking up on the strange energy, but not yet understanding why. Emma's professional mask didn't slip, though her knuckles were white as she gripped her notepad. "Can I start you off with any appetizers?" she asked, her voice steady but slightly higher than normal. She didn't look directly at Michael, instead focusing on a point just past his shoulder. Michael couldn't form words. His mind was racing with questions. How long had she known? Why hadn't she told him? Was she working 2 jobs now? The gold bracelet he had just given Rebecca suddenly felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. "Emma?" Rebecca's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Of course, she recognized Emma from company photos, from social media, from all the history Michael had tried to erase. "Oh my God." Her face flushed red as she too noticed Emma's condition. The silence that followed was excruciating. A nearby table laughed at something, the sound jarring in their bubble of discomfort. A glass clinked. Someone coughed, and still, they sat frozen in their terrible tableau. Emma was the first to recover, her years of teaching kindergarten apparently helping her maintain composure in difficult situations. "Would you prefer a different server?" she asked quietly, addressing her question to the candle flickering between them rather than meeting either of their eyes. "No," Michael said too quickly, finally finding his voice. "No, I mean, Emma, But what could he say? What words could possibly address this situation they found themselves in? Rebecca's earlier birthday excitement had evaporated completely. She sat rigid in her chair, her own hand covering the new bracelet as if to hide it. The reality of their affair, Michael's abandonment, sat at their table like an unwelcome fourth guest. "I'll give you a few more minutes with the menu," Emma said professionally, though her voice trembled slightly on the last word. As she turned to leave, Michael noticed her shoes. Practical black sneakers, not the fashionable heels she used to wear. His mind flashed of her standing for hours, carrying heavy trays, all while pregnant with his child. "Wait," he called out, but Emma had already walked away, disappearing into the busy restaurant floor with practiced efficiency. Michael watched her go, noticed how she paused at the server station to take a deep breath, one hand still resting on her pregnant belly. Rebecca's voice was ice cold when she spoke. "How long did you know?" she demanded, but the accusation died on her lips when she saw Michael's genuine shock. His face had gone gray, and he was still staring in the direction Emma had gone. The expensive wine list lay forgotten on the table. The carefully planned birthday dinner was ruined. But more than that, Michael's carefully constructed new life had just cracked wide open, revealing the consequences of his choices in the most unexpected and heart-wrenching way possible. He looked down at his hands, remembering how they used to rest on Emma's stomach when they talked about having children someday. Now that someday had arrived, and he was sitting at the wrong table, with the wrong woman, having made all the wrong choices. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Michael's life. Emma maintained her professional demeanor as she served them, but every interaction was loaded with unspoken words. She took their orders with mechanical precision, her notepad steady despite the slight tremor in her voice. Through the painful dinner service, Michael noticed things about Emma that felt like punches to his gut. The dark circles under her eyes were more prominent up close. Her black uniform had been carefully altered to accommodate her growing belly. She moved more slowly than the other servers, one hand often supporting her lower back when she thought no one was watching. "The salmon, medium rare," Emma said, placing Rebecca's plate down first. Her wedding ring finger was bare, but there was still a pale line where it used to be. "And a ribeye steak for you." She didn't add just how you like it, though Michael knew she remembered his preference for medium well. Rebecca barely touched her food, pushing the perfectly cooked salmon around her plate. The birthday celebration mood had evaporated completely. Instead, she watched Emma's every move with a mixture of guilt and fascination, her new bracelet catching the light every time she moved her hand. During one of Emma's stops to refill their water glasses, Michael overheard a conversation between her and another server near the service station. "You shouldn't be carrying such heavy trays, Emma," the other server whispered. "Let me take table 12's orders." "I need the hours, Jenny," Emma replied quietly. "The medical bills aren't going to pay themselves." She didn't know Michael could hear her, and the words made his stomach turn. When Emma returned to check on them, Michael couldn't help but ask, "How long have you been working here?" His voice came out hoarse, desperate. Emma's professional mask cracked slightly. 3 months, she answered, then added with quiet dignity, "The kindergarten salary wasn't enough after. Changes in my situation." The words weren't accusatory, which somehow made them worse. Rebecca excused herself to the restroom, leaving Michael and Emma alone for the first time. The questions he wanted to ask stuck in his throat. "Are you okay? Is the baby healthy? Why didn't you tell me?" But he had lost the right to ask these questions the day he walked out. "Emma," he started, but she cut him off with a slight shake of her head. "Not here," she said softly. "I'm working." The simple statement carried the weight of their new reality. She was here serving tables at an upscale restaurant while carrying his child, trying to make ends meet. Throughout the evening, Michael noticed other details that painted a clearer picture of Emma's situation. Her sensible shoes were worn at the edges, the silver necklace he had given her years ago, her only jewelry, at a broken clasp held together with clear nail polish. She kept her chin up, but exhaustion showed in every movement. Other servers helped her with heavier tasks, showing a protective camaraderie that suggested they knew her story. The hostess would catch Emma's eye and gesture for her to take short breaks. The bartender kept sending her glasses of water with lemon. When it came time for dessert, Rebecca declined, her appetite gone. Michael couldn't eat another bite either, the expensive steak sitting like lead in his stomach. Emma brought their check without being asked, clearly eager to end this uncomfortable encounter. As Michael reached for his wallet, he saw Emma serving a young family at a nearby table. She smiled genuinely at their little girl, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. The scene hit him hard. This should have been their future, but instead, Emma was working a second job to support herself and their unborn child while he dined at expensive restaurants with his girlfriend. Rebecca was unusually quiet as they prepared to leave. Emma had disappeared into the kitchen, sparing them all an awkward goodbye. As they waited for the valet, Rebecca finally spoke. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice tight. "About the baby?" Michael shook his head, words failing him. The weight of what he'd done, leaving his wife who was possibly already carrying his child, pressed down on him like a physical force. The perfect evening he had planned had turned into a nightmare, forcing him to face the consequences of his choices in the most unexpected way possible. Their ride home was silent, the new bracelet on Rebecca's wrist catching the streetlights like tears. The morning after the restaurant encounter, Michael sat in his office, unable to focus on anything. His computer screen showed unopened emails, but his mind kept replaying the image of Emma, pregnant and working as a waitress. The reality of his choices had never felt more crushing. Rebecca hadn't come to work that day, sending a brief text saying she needed time to think. The office buzzed with whispers. Apparently, someone from the restaurant staff knew someone who worked in their building, and the story of last night's encounter was spreading fast. Around noon, Michael's phone lit up with a call from his mother. His hand shook as he answered it. "How could you not tell me Emma was pregnant?" His mother's voice cracked with emotion. "I had to hear it from Linda at church, whose daughter works at that restaurant." "Mom, I didn't know," Michael said weakly, closing his office door as colleagues walked past. "I just found out last night." The silence on the other end was deafening. "You left your pregnant wife," his mother finally said, each word heavy with disappointment. "She's been working 2 jobs, Michael. 2 jobs while carrying my grandchild." The shame that washed over him was overwhelming. After hanging up, Michael tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting. He found himself Googling pregnancy websites, calculating weeks and months, realizing Emma must have been in her first trimester when he left. The morning sickness she blamed on stress, the fatigue he'd attributed to her job, it all made horrible sense now. Around 3 o'clock, Rebecca appeared in his office doorway. She looked like she hadn't slept, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged. "We need to talk," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. Michael knew what was coming even before she spoke. The carefully constructed fantasy they built together had shattered the moment they saw Emma at that restaurant. "I can't do this," Rebecca said, sitting across from him. "Last night, seeing her like that." She twisted the gold bracelet on her wrist. "Do you know what everyone's saying? That I'm the woman who helped break up a marriage and abandon a pregnant woman." "Rebecca, I didn't know she was pregnant," Michael protested weakly, but Rebecca held up her hand. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Even if you didn't know, what we did was wrong. I convinced myself that your marriage was already over, that we weren't really hurting anyone. But seeing Emma last night," her voice broke. "She was wearing worn-out shoes, Michael, working a second job to support herself and your baby while we were spending money on expensive restaurants and jewelry." Michael sat there, unable to defend himself. Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger. "I spent the whole day thinking about who I've become. This isn't me. I'm not the other woman who destroys families." She stood up, unclasping the gold bracelet he'd given her just yesterday. It felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm done," she said, placing the bracelet on his desk. "We're done. You need to make this right, Michael. Not for me, not for you, but for your child." As Rebecca walked out of his office and his life, Michael felt his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. His phone was filled with missed calls and messages from family and friends who had heard about last night. Each one was a reminder of how far he had fallen. He tried calling Emma's old number, but it was disconnected. His email to her bounced back. When he called the restaurant, they politely but firmly told him that they couldn't give out employee information. That evening, Michael drove past their old apartment building, but different names were on the mailbox. He went to the kindergarten where Emma taught, but the school was closed. It hit him then, sitting in his car in the empty school parking lot, that he had no right to disrupt her life again. The gravity of what he'd done, abandoning his wife, his unborn child, the life they'd built together, pressed down on him like a physical weight. The expensive watch on his wrist, the new car he sat in, the promotion he'd gotten, none of it seemed to matter anymore. As night fell, Michael remained in the parking lot, staring at the empty playground where Emma's students would play during recess. He had traded his real life for a fantasy, and now both had slipped through his fingers. The weeks following the restaurant incident were a blur of desperate attempts to contact Emma. Michael tried everything, reaching out to mutual friends, visiting her parents' house, even stopping by the restaurant again, only to learn she had quit immediately after that night. His mother, usually his strongest ally, refused to help. "Emma came to me when you left," she finally revealed during one of his pleading phone calls. She was scared, confused, and hadn't even confirmed the pregnancy yet. "I promised her I would respect her privacy if she needed it. I won't break that promise, Michael, not even for you." At work, things had become unbearable. Rebecca had requested a transfer to the company's West Coast office, and rumors followed Michael everywhere. The story had grown with each retelling. Some people now claimed Emma had served them their entire meal while in labor. He stopped going to the break room to avoid the whispers and stares. One rainy Tuesday, Michael ran into Tom from accounting in the elevator. The silence was awkward until Tom spoke. "You know, she tried to reach you the week after you left." Michael's head snapped up. "Emma called the office, but you were in that long meeting with Rebecca. She never called back." The information hit Michael like a physical blow. He remembered that meeting. He and Rebecca had been planning a weekend getaway, pretending to discuss client strategies. Had Emma been trying to tell them about the baby? He threw himself into searching for her, hiring a private investigator who came back with nothing. "She's very careful about her privacy," the investigator explained, returning Michael's check. "And she has a lot of people protecting her. Sometimes, sir, we need to respect when someone doesn't want to be found." Michael's apartment, once a symbol of his new life with Rebecca, felt cold and empty. He found himself pulling out old photos from the hidden folder on his phone. Emma at their wedding, Emma gardening, Emma teaching him to bake cookies and laughing when he burned them. The memories that once made him feel trapped now showed him everything he had thrown away. One evening, he gathered the courage to drive to Emma's parents' house again. Her father answered the door this time. Mr. Thompson, who had once treated Michael like a son, looked at him with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "She's safe," was all he would say. "She's healthy, and so is the baby. That's all you need to know." Before closing the door, he added, "You know, Michael, I always taught Emma that everyone deserves a second chance, but some people prove they don't deserve even one." The words haunted Michael for days. He started seeing pregnant women everywhere. In the grocery store, at the coffee shop, crossing the street. Each one reminded him of Emma, of the family he had abandoned without even knowing it existed. His sister Sarah finally took pity on him and shared one small detail. Emma had left her teaching job for a position at a different school district. She needed a fresh start, Sarah explained. Somewhere she wouldn't run into you or Rebecca or any reminders of what happened. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning. Emma's lawyer had processed everything efficiently, asking for nothing except medical bill coverage for the pregnancy and basic child support once the baby was born. There was a note attached. "My client wishes to handle all future communications through legal channels only." Michael sat at his kitchen counter, staring at the papers. The Emma he knew had written in the margins of everything: shopping lists, birthday cards, even their wedding vows. These papers were pristine, clinical, devoid of any personal touch. It felt like the final door closing. That night, he dreamed of a baby crying. In the dream, he walked through endless hospital corridors, following the sound, but every time he thought he was getting closer, the crying grew more distant. He woke up sweating, reaching for his phone to check the time, only to find himself staring at his background image, still set to a photo of him and Emma from happier days. As autumn turned to winter, Michael realized that his actions had built a wall stronger than any physical barrier. Emma had created a new life for herself and their unborn child, one that deliberately excluded him, and the worst part was knowing that he had no one to blame but himself. Spring arrived with gentle warmth, 4 months after the restaurant encounter. Michael was walking through Henderson Park, trying to clear his head after another sleepless night, when he saw them. Emma was sitting on a checkered picnic blanket under an oak tree, a tiny bundle wrapped in yellow blankets cradled in her arms. She looked different, peaceful, despite the obvious exhaustion of new motherhood. Her hair was shorter now, falling just above her shoulders, and she wore a simple sundress that made her look both vulnerable and strong. Around her sat a protective circle of friends, including Jenny from the restaurant and several teachers from her old school. Michael stood frozen on the path, partially hidden behind a large maple tree. The baby made a small sound, and Emma's face lit up with a smile he remembered so well. She adjusted the tiny hat on the baby's head, a handmade one, he guessed, probably from his mother, who had always loved knitting. A light breeze carried fragments of conversation to where he stood. "She has your eyes, Emma," one of her friends said. Another added, "And thank goodness for that." They all laughed, and Emma hugged the baby closer, dropping a gentle kiss on its forehead. Michael's hands trembled as he watched the scene unfold. This was his child, their child, and he was watching from the shadows like a stranger. The weight of everything he had lost pressed down on him until it was hard to breathe. Emma looked stronger now, more confident. Gone was the uncertain waitress in worn-out shoes. She had rebuilt her life without him, surrounded by people who truly cared for her. Her parents arrived with a picnic basket, and Michael watched his former father-in-law gently take the baby, his face beaming with grandfather pride. The baby's cry carried across the park, a strong, healthy sound that made Michael's heart ache. He wanted to walk over, to see his child's face, to apologize for everything, but he knew he had no right. Emma's peaceful afternoon with her loved ones was not his to disturb. As if sensing his presence, Emma looked up suddenly, her eyes scanning the park. Michael stepped further behind the tree, his heart pounding. When he dared to look again, she was focused on the baby, who had started fussing. She reached into a diaper bag decorated with colorful elephants, the same pattern they had once talked about using for a nursery in what felt like another lifetime. His mother arrived last, carrying what looked like another handmade blanket. She joined the group on the blanket, immediately reaching for the baby. Michael watched as she cradled his child, her face glowing with happiness. She had chosen her side in this story, and he couldn't blame her. The scene before him was everything he had thrown away: family, love, belonging. Emma had created this warm circle of support while he had chased an illusion of excitement with Rebecca. Now, Rebecca was in California, his friends had distanced themselves, and he stood alone, watching his child grow up from afar. A young couple walked past him, pushing a stroller, their happy chatter a stark contrast to his solitude. The father was making silly faces at their toddler, who laughed with pure joy. Michael turned away, unable to bear watching anymore. As he walked back through the park, he heard Emma's laugh one last time, bright and genuine, the kind of laugh he had once taken for granted. She had found her happiness again, built a new life from the ashes of their marriage. Their child would grow up surrounded by love and support, even if he wasn't part of it. Michael reached his car and sat there for a long time, watching the park through his windshield. The weight of his choices had never felt heavier. He had walked away from a marriage thinking he was trapped, only to find himself truly trapped now, separated from his child by walls of his own making. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park as families packed up their picnic blankets and headed home. He watched Emma's group gather their things, his mother carrying the baby while Emma folded the blanket. They moved as a unit, a family bonded by love and choice rather than just blood. Michael started his car, understanding finally that sometimes the consequences of our choices last forever. As he drove away, the image of Emma and their child remained in his mind, not as a reminder of what he had lost, but as a lesson in what truly matters in life, learned far too late.